Welcome back to our explainer series on the book Perverting Our Reproductive Nature. We're jumping right into Chapter 6, Feminism and Adversarial Gender Dynamics. Today we're going to neutrally unpack a really complex, fascinating cultural commentary on how the relationship between men and women has completely shifted over the last century. So, what actually happens when men and women start viewing each other as rivals instead of partners? This question is literally the heartbeat of this chapter. Think about the friction you might observe in modern dating today. The author asks us to seriously consider the societal cost when our culture moves away from mutual reliance and instead starts framing male and female interactions as this inherent constant struggle for power. To keep us on track, here's the roadmap for this shift. We'll look at the blueprint of complementarity, the ideological shift, the fractured relational trust, the redefinition of power, and finally, rebuilding the relational design. Let's get into it. Now, if you recall from our earlier chapters, we talked about how the introduction of hormonal birth control fundamentally severed sex from its natural reproductive consequence. Well, the author argues that those exact technological disruptions laid the groundwork for the collapse of traditional marriage norms, which basically opened the door wide open for a totally new adversarial ideology. Starting with Part 1, the blueprint of complementarity and how it served as a foundation of trust. The author kicks things off by looking back at what they call the original biological architecture of humanity. Historically, the text suggests, survival relied on weaving together. Cooperation, basically. Men and women were bound by absolute necessity, creating this foundational harmony that built civilization. But today, the argument is that we've completely swapped out that cooperative model for a warring dynamic, where it's all about competition. So what does complementarity actually mean here? The author defines it as the idea that male and female bodies, hormones, and emotional instincts are literally designed to complete each other, not compete with each other. We're talking protector and nurturer, strength and softness. The text emphasizes that this isn't just some made-up social construct, it's a biological blueprint designed to sustain life. Moving right along to our next section, the ideological shift from complement to competition. Now, let's unpack how the author claims second and third wave feminism changed this blueprint. While the book totally acknowledges that early feminism fought for crucial, noble things like voting and property rights, it argues that later waves brought in a completely different cultural script. The text claims this new script framed male-female relations as an inherently combative power imbalance. By focusing heavily on systemic patriarchy, the author says feminism started viewing men as oppressors and cast natural interdependence as a weakness you had to overcome. To illustrate this, the book pulls a 1953 quote from Simone de Beauvoir. "No woman should be authorized to stay at home to raise her children. If there is such a choice, too many women will make that one." The author uses this to argue there was an intentional ideological effort to undermine motherhood. It suggests that the deep-seated desire of many women to raise a family was purposefully reframed as a chain that society needed to break. Then there's this quote from Shulamith Firestone about eliminating the sex distinction itself. The author calls this gender nihilism, a total rejection of the biological realities of male and female. The argument here is that this specific ideology pushed our culture to erase biological distinctions, creating deep, deep tension right where cooperation used to live. Which leads us to the next point, a fractured relational trust and the cultural fallout we see today. So you dismantle the trust and what happens? The building collapses, right? The book asserts that teaching women to be suspicious and men to be ashamed has led to some unprecedented social disconnection. You've got young men retreating into apathy because they're terrified of being labeled toxic, while empowered women are facing all this ambiguity and doubt in courtship. Basically, the text argues we've traded the sacred cultural covenant of family for temporary, contractual convenience. And the author brings the receipts, mapping out this collapse with some pretty stark numbers. The average age of a first marriage in the U.S. is now pushed to nearly 30. Divorce rates are hovering between 40 and 50%. And here's a wild one from Pew Research. 63% of single young men under 30 have just completely opted out of the dating pool entirely. The author interprets all of this data as the direct spiritual fallout of these adversarial gender dynamics. This paradox is perfectly captured in an observation the author highlights from Carrie Gress. Feminism promised liberation, but it delivered loneliness. It's a heavy thought. We boast all this unprecedented freedom, we've thrown off traditional expectations, but the text suggests that by severing our biological design from our culture, we didn't actually find liberation. Instead, we inherited chaos and profound loneliness. Let's shift gears to our fourth theme, the redefinition of power, from rivalry to to reciprocity. This brings up a fascinating conversation about what we actually validate as powerful today. The text breaks it down into masculine power, the strength to protect, initiate, and build, versus feminine power, the strength to nurture, sustain, and inspire. And the author is super clear here. Neither is superior. Both are incredibly sacred and absolutely necessary to create the stable structure any healthy society needs. But here's the tragic irony the book points out. Modern culture will praise a woman wielding overt power in a corporate boardroom, but often totally dismisses the quiet, culture-shaping power historically wielded by mothers in the home. The author critiques this idea that female empowerment only counts if it mimics masculine dominance. By doing that, the argument goes, we're actually erasing true feminine power instead of elevating it. Finally, we arrive at our last section, rebuilding the relational design and the path forward. So where do we go from here? If the last century was all about tearing things down, the author suggests this century has to be about building them back up. The text challenges us to actively reject this false dichotomy of the sexes. Stop viewing men and women as natural oppressors. Get back to that foundational biological blueprint and realize that real strength actually grows when we share it, not when we're constantly wrestling each other for it. All of this ties perfectly back to the book's overarching thesis. The author argues that true meaning isn't found in absolute, isolated independence. It's found in self-giving, covenantal love. The deepest human need isn't freedom from one another, it's faithfulness to one another. Interdependence, not independence, is the ultimate goal here if we want to honor our reproductive design. And that leaves us with this incredible summary of the author's vision, that men and women were never meant to be rivals, but reflections. Reflections of strength and grace, courage and care. When rightly ordered, the author claims these differences don't divide us, they literally make us whole. It leaves you with a really provocative question, doesn't it? What if the natural design we've spent decades trying to escape is actually the exact thing we need to heal? As we look ahead to later chapters where the book explores the economics of modern dating and the rise of digital intimacy, keep this fundamental shift from complementarity to competition in the back of your mind. To continue this journey, explore the broader thesis, and support the author's work, head on over to the interactive companion site at pervertingourreproductivenature.com.